Bibles tonight to the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter number 12. The book of 2 Corinthians and chapter number 12. I'm going to speak tonight on gladly spend and be spent. Gladly spend and be spent. Most of us, in fact all of us in this room, if we knew the information at the end, wouldn't even start. Because of our human nature, we would look at the task, we would look at the project, we would look at the work that God had entrusted us to do, and we would say, what's the point? What's the use if that's the result? Paul, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, is underappreciated, sorely underappreciated, and because of this, he takes some liberty, beginning in chapter 11, and then especially in chapter 12, and he refers to himself actually as a fool. Very unusual that he would do that, because he knows that he is indulging himself, but he is doing it for a purpose, and he's doing it for a reason, to drive a point home to the Corinthians. Now, he had established this church, and he loved these people. Note the expression he writes in verse 15. He says, I love you, though the more abundantly I love you. Paul was a man who loved people. He uses the expression that night and day in the book of Acts, that he warned people from house to house with tears. Paul was a tender man. Paul was a very, very caustic man and a very, very cold-hearted man when he was a Pharisee. He was a mean individual before he got saved. But when he got saved and he trusted Christ, he became a tremendously tender man. Always recognizing his past. Referring to himself as the least of all the apostles. Albeit he started more churches and established more Christians than any of the apostles, and probably most of the apostles combined. Paul was a great man. And as an apostle, though he was kind of a Johnny-come-lately, and he was an apostle, as the Bible says, born out of due time, Paul was a man greatly underappreciated. And so I want you to, I want to say this as a preface tonight. If you have the impression that if you become a pastor, or you become a Sunday school teacher, or you become a parent, or you become an evangelist, or you're involved in any kind of ministry as a Christian, that everybody's going to love you, and everybody's going to appreciate you, and every moment of every day, people are going to be patting you on the back and kissing you on the cheek and giving you an attaboy, you've got another thing coming. Because a lot of people absolutely don't know anything about you, and quite frankly, don't care. They can grow to care, but we don't base what we do upon the appreciation of others. Paul is very careful how he explains himself in verse 11. He speaks in chapter 12 at the beginning of this vision that he had of heaven. And he talks about how God, because of all that he saw, buffeted him with a messenger of Satan, allowed Satan to buffet him so he didn't get arrogant, didn't get prideful. And it worked. In verse 11, he says this. He says, I am become a fool in glorying. But note what it says in the next phrase. Ye have compelled me. I'm doing this for you because you need to hear what I have to say. Because you really don't know who's talking to you. And listen to what he says. And by the way, there are a lot of people that have no idea the training and the growth and the years that you've been saved and what you bring to the table and the credibility that you should have in their eyes but don't. And so Paul says this. He says in verse 11, "For I ought to have been commended of you." In other words, I should have had much more respect from you. But I didn't. But that didn't change Paul's ministry. It didn't affect his efforts. It didn't affect what he did. He says, "For in nothing am I behind the very chiefest apostles." In other words, he says, there's not one of the apostles has anything on me. We're all on the same level. But you don't know that. But I'm telling you that because of the lack of respect that you are giving me as an apostle. We don't throw that in people's faces with what we have learned. But we don't need to be discouraged because people don't give us the respect. If people didn't respect Paul and people didn't respect Jesus, who are I? Who are we? Look at what he says. He says, "For in nothing am I behind the very chiefest apostles," and look at the next phrase, "though I be nothing." We are nothing. Compared to Jesus, we're nothing. And there ought to be some credibility. The Bible tells us that we are to give honor to whom honor is due, custom to whom custom. There should be a respect that we give to brothers and sisters in Christ. There's nothing wrong with recognition, nothing wrong with encouraging people, nothing wrong with pointing out the strengths and the abilities that God has given people. But always remember that we don't do that. We don't do the things and serve the Lord because of the respect that people bring, because especially new Christians, they have no idea. To them, you could just be saved as long as they were. They have no reference. And so don't do things because of the respect. Continue, verse 13. "For what is it wherein ye were inferior to other churches, except it be that I myself was not burdensome to you?" He says then in verse 14, "Behold, the third time I am ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you. For I seek not yours, but you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children." This is talking about spiritually speaking. If you're looking for people to give to you after you give to them, you're going to be really disappointed. Because children need to be helped. Parents have been already helped. And it's important that we be like spiritual parents to people. That's part of discipleship. Paul talked about being a father in the gospel. He talked about being like a father to Timothy. He was a father to many young men. And he mentored them. You see that in the Bible many times. So, Paul was not a burden to the Corinthians. In fact, he said in an earlier book, in 1 Corinthians, that he said he didn't preach anything save Christ and Him crucified. And he didn't charge them because he didn't want them to think that he was in their pockets. That's one reason I do not want to know what people give. Because I don't want people to think that I'm enamored because somebody comes in here with lots of money. Now, if you have lots of money and you are gracious and you want to give them, what you want to give, that's your business. But the fact is, Paul saw more about people, and he says, I seek not yours, but you. I'm not looking for you to remunerate me. That's not what I'm here for. And the ministry, by the way, is not what you get out, but what you give. And that's a mistake a lot of people, a perception a lot of people make. They don't get that. They are looking to be reciprocated for everything. I'm trying to teach my grandsons this. There are times where I say, now look, you help Papa. We're going to do yard work, or we're going to do this. And I have my grandson Carson. He loves to work. I mean, I'm not joking. He would rather work and do something constructive with Papa or with Grammy than he would to play. Now that's, and 90% of the young people are like, for real? There's something wrong with that kid, okay? But and every once in a while I'll say, if you help, or even not, I won't tell him at the beginning, but I'll give him a few bucks, or I'll give $1 or $2. Every once in a while, if they've really done a great job, I'll maybe give them $5, and that, $5 to a 5-year-old, that's like $100. And so every once in a while, we'll do a project, and the question will be asked, am I going to be paid? We were up here doing some work here at the church yesterday, and he asked me that. And I said, no, we're at church and we're doing this for Jesus. We're doing it because we love Him. And when we get that in our head, that what we are doing, we're not doing to be remunerated. We're doing it because we love Him and we love people. We're not looking for what we can get out of people, but we're looking for what we can give. I seek not yours, but you, for the children ought not to lay up for the parents. So first, don't worry about the respect. And secondly, don't worry about what you get back. Worry about what you give. Take an interest in people. And be sacrificial with people without having to be remunerated. Verse 15, he says this, and I love this. And I will very gladly spend and be spent for you, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I be loved. Now this is kind of shocking, because you're going to minister, and you're not going to have the respect. People are not going to give you the credibility that you deserve and you should deserve. You should have, because a lot of them are new Christians and they have no idea. Secondly, you're not always going to get back what you've put in, and it's not an even Steven deal. You give without thought of having it given back. But you're also going to find in ministry that you're going to love, and you're not going to be loved back. So let's kind of drive it home a little bit with the Lord. We love Him because He first loved us. So, do you think that we can draw the conclusion from that statement that He loved when He wasn't loved back? Yes or no? How long was it before we got saved? I was 14. How about you? I was 14. Just shout it out. 11. 5. 8. 25. 26, 14, 18, 12, 7, 6, 15. Okay? So, all those years, God loved you. And He gave He continued to love you, and then finally one day, you decided that you would love Him back. That's the Christian life. You love, and 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 you're always loved less than you love. It's reality, okay? And the sooner you face that, the less you'll be discouraged in your Christian life. Again, as I said at the beginning of the message, if going into ministry or ministering, whether you are a full-time minister or you are a layman and you're part of the congregation, if before you decided to do it, you had this information, none of us would just say, well, I'm not going to do this. This makes no sense. But you keep doing it because you're doing it for Jesus. You're not doing it for you. You're doing it for the Lord. And a servant is not greater than his master. Jesus wasn't loved like He loved. Remember Peter? Lovest thou me more than these? Fish. Peter, are you is this really what you're going to go back and give your life to? After all the love I've put into you, all that I have invested in you, and you're going to go back to this. Do you love me? Yea, Lord, I love you. But he wasn't using the same word love as Jesus was using. You're going to be disappointed. You're not going to be loved as much as you love, but still love anyway. Not only will you not be loved, but you will also be misunderstood. He writes this. He says, But be it so, I did not burden you. Nevertheless, being crafty, I caught you with guile. So he caught them in some hypocrisy and some lies. He said, Did I make a gain of you by any of them whom I sent unto you? I desired Titus, and with him I sent a brother. Did Titus make a gain of you? Walk we not in the same spirit? Walk we not in the same steps? You receive Titus, but you don't receive me? What's different between us? Nothing's different between us. They misunderstood Paul. And you're going to find that sometimes people are not going to treat you right because they misunderstand your motive. Paul had a great motive. He said, I gladly will spend and be spent. I love you more than you imagine. And though you don't understand me, that's not going to stop me from continuing to serve you and minister just because you misunderstand me. It's not just pastors. It's parents. It's grandparents. It's friends. You'll say something. People will take it wrong. And when you say it, even in love, people will misunderstand. Paul is saying, I don't get it. I had the right motive. I have everything. I'm no different than Titus. But you treat Titus one way, but you're treating me like I'm somebody different. I'm not any different. We're walking in the same steps. We are walking in the same spirit. Verse 19, again, think ye that we excuse ourselves unto you. We speak before God and Christ, but we do all things, dearly beloved, for your edifying. In other words, everything we're doing for your benefit, to build your life, to grow your faith, and yet you're misunderstanding it all. You're misunderstanding the motive. It has nothing to do with any self-interest. Titus didn't have any skin in the game. Paul didn't have any skin in the game. It was all about them and their spiritual growth, that Paul was doing what he was doing for the benefit of them in their relationship with Jesus Christ. So if you think that everybody's going to embrace you and everybody's going to understand you, or not, and you're going to not have this understanding, and you're just going to be loved, and you're always going to be understood, you're kidding yourself. But don't get discouraged in ministry. Be willing to be gladly to spend and be spent for Christ. When I think of that statement, I think of David Brainerd. David Brainerd died at 27. And he spoke of being willing to burn out for Christ. He gave every effort he could possibly give, and died at a very young age. And he would have gladly done it again. We should never regret a day of serving Jesus. It's a privilege. Every bit of it. The good, the bad, the ugly. All of it is a privilege. And so always gladly spend and be spent for others for Christ's sake. The last thing he deals with is found in verse 20. He says, "For I fear, lest when I come," now look at this, "I shall not find you such as I would." Paul had established the Corinthian church, and he wrote 2 letters to them over the course of several years. And Paul says, I fear that I'm not going to see the results I was looking for, that which I hoped for. Here's why a lot of people leave the ministry and leave the church. Because they invest their life and they give their life to people who don't appreciate them, don't respect them. They love and they're not loved back. They give and they don't seem to be reciprocated. They're misunderstood and they're treated, as Paul was at times, like the offscouring of the earth. And then with all their efforts and all their energy and all their time and everything that they've invested, they see at the end the results, and it's like it's a waste of time. I want to read a statement. Leave your finger there and go back one book to Galatians. And I want to read a statement that Paul makes. I believe it's in chapter 3 or 4. Paul uses the expression in one of these chapters. I just was looking at it earlier tonight. And he says, he uses the expression that he felt like he had labored in vain. 4:11? Okay. So here's what he says. And he again established this church, and he's tried to be an encouragement to this church, and many of them had gone back into legalism, adding circumcision to salvation and being troubled by the Judaizers. And so verse 11, he says, "I am afraid of you, lest I bestowed upon you labor in vain." Now let's read what he writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 20, and tell me that this is not almost like the same expression. What did he say? "For I fear." Is fear being afraid? "I fear, lest when I come, I shall not find you such as I would, and that I shall be found unto you such as you would not, lest there be debates and envyings, wraths, strifes, bickerings, backbitings, whisperings, swellings, tumults, and lest when I come again, my God will humble me among you, and that I shall bewail many which have sinned already, and have not repented of the uncleanness and fornication and lasciviousness which they have committed. That's what Paul was fearing. How he would find those that he had invested. That's going to happen. It happens to every pastor. It happens to every Sunday school teacher. It happens to every deacon. It happens to every parent. It happens to every friend. It happens to every brother and sister. It happens to every individual that's saved who takes a part of their life and gives it away. It happens. By the way, it happened to Jesus. He had invested in Judas Iscariot for over 3 years, only to be betrayed by him in the garden. He invested in Peter, and he was denied. And Peter was not in a good way when he met him at the shore of Galilee. He spoke of a man named Demas. He said, Demas hath forsaken me, having loved this present world. Demas was not just a church member. Demas was in leadership, and he forsook Paul. Barnabas, he had a nephew, and Paul says he's not good, he's not profitable. I'm not taking him with us. He can't. He quit one time. I'm not taking him. Barnabas says, yes, we are. He says, no, we're not. He said, yes, we are. And he says, no, we're not. Guess what? You don't hear any more about Barnabas. Ever. But you do hear about John Mark. He eventually came back. Sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't. That doesn't mean you quit. Because there's always somebody that will receive. Always somebody that ultimately will get it. Always somebody whose life will be changed and transformed. If all of us at the end of our life, or throughout our Christian life, can grasp that statement that Paul made, and I will very, very gladly, he says, spend and be spent for you, then it won't matter what people do. It won't matter the results. All that matters is you've been privileged to serve Him. And that will keep you going. Because when we stand before God, He will recognize us and give credibility. He will reward us. We will definitely be loved back by Him. And all that we have invested will be given back and more. He will never misunderstand us because He knows everything about us. And He will never fail us. It's a privilege to serve Him. Our Father, we thank You for tonight. I pray that You bless us during the invitation. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed, and let's stand together. Every one of you, in whatever capacity that you have been serving the Lord. This message tonight is to be an encouragement to you to keep on for Him. To not get discouraged. Because it's not about people. Ministry is about Jesus. It's not even about the results. It's all about Jesus. Adoniram Judson spent 8 years in a country called Burma with not one convert. when he left and went to China, a revival broke out. He didn't get the credit, but God did, and that was what it was all about. Some sow, some water, but God giveth the increase. So Christian, tonight, don't get discouraged. Christians are some of the most unappreciated, unloved, mistreated, misunderstood, and rejected people in life. But if we wallow in that, we'll never do anything for God. So I hope tonight you'll be encouraged by Paul's remarks. Being very glad to spend and be spent. The altar's open. Brian's chosen a song of invitation tonight. Maybe this has encouraged you. Maybe you just want to come in front of the Lord and just, or either here at the front or at the there where you're seated, and just say, Lord, I'm going to keep on keeping on. Not going to quit. Even with all the discouragements, even with all the disappointments, I'm not going to quit. How about it, Christian? God touch your heart tonight. Let Him have His way.